35 minutes past the hour. It is indeed the Jeff Santos Show that you're tuned into. As many of you know, and we talked to Robert Craig about this, I'm a hockey fan, and it was great to see today that the National Hockey League has now had its 32nd, added its 32nd NHL team to play in the great city of Seattle. And isn't it nice that the same day that they announce our great friend, Mark Taylor Canfield, who is from where? Seattle, WA. It is so great to have him on this historic day in the great state of Washington, the great city of Seattle. He is, of course, a great journalist, a great musician. Heard a little bit of his music just there. And, of course, he's a guest here every Tuesday on the Jeff Santos Show. Mark Taylor Canfield, how you doing, my friend?
Well, Jeff, as your favorite band U2 might say, it's a beautiful day in Seattle, but don't tell anybody. And I just got back into town from another trip down the Puget Sound on the Salish Sea, the beautiful Salish Sea, and still working on my song about the beautiful Showbox Theater. But I'm once again amazed by the sheer beauty of this part of the country we live in, Jeff. We're very, very blessed to be here. Definitely.
Well, you know, it's a great city, and I'm hoping to get out there. And now that you guys are official having the team, and go out there and watch one of my favorite sports and do that. But this has implications, of course, this new franchise, to the redevelopment of a stadium. And I heard Mr. Lewicki and others, Mr. Bonderman today at the press conference, talk about that this is the only arena that will be inside of a park. And that gives me kind of pause because, public parks are a treasure in our cities across the country. And, so how is this new redevelopment of the Key Arena, which is just blocks from the Space Needle, and I've been in that area in the past, how does it all come to play as this exciting idea of a new team and first NHL franchise going back to the Seattle Metropolitans in 1912 to 1918 or whatever it was, won the Cup in 1917, the first American franchise, American city to win one. So, what impacts does this whole, announcement today have? It's another 2.5 years until they start playing hockey games there. What do you anticipate? What is the word around town? I saw a few of the reporters from the Seattle Times and King TV were at the press conference today in Georgia, where they had the NHL meetings and the announcement today. What is your thoughts and what are you hearing in local media there in Seattle and the impact?
Well, first of all, we're talking about the 2021 to 22 season, so it's going to be a couple years.
Right.
The franchise really, the ownership really wanted to kick it off in 2020, but the league just said, they had reservations about whether they wanted to rush the renovations of Key Arena, so they pushed it a year back.
Right.
So they're actually breaking ground tomorrow morning on the Key Arena for an $800 million renovation. And then meanwhile, the NWBA's Seattle Storm is going to relocate to another venue for the 2019 season while they get that going. But it's been an ongoing issue. As part of the reason that we probably didn't rescore an NBA team because there were concerns about the Key Arena. And although I've told you that I've seen some of the greatest rock concerts there, I saw Peter Gabriel and his daughter do one of the best shows I've ever seen, where literally he was writing upside down on a bicycle, singing, writing upside down from the ceiling on a bicycle. So it's an historic place. But it's also my neighborhood, Jeff. I live right here. I'm looking at the Space Needle out my window. So it's right at the foot of the Space Needle and it is a public park. It's the Seattle Center. But I think it's going to be okay, Jeff, because people in Seattle are used to the Seattle Center being, a major, gathering place for protests. I know the Women's March converged there. So did the Students' March against the NRA converge there. Folk Life is there every year. Bumbershoot is there. KEXP has amazing free music concerts. every Friday in the summer at the Mural Amphitheater outdoors right underneath the Space Needle. So people are used to gathering there for rock concerts and all sorts of other events. So I don't think it's going to really affect the park too much. It's a city park, so it's typical. It's got our international fountain that people like to run through when it's hot in the summer, and an art gallery and all sorts of other buildings there where cultural and artistic things are going on. So I think it is suited actually to deal with that crowd and that size of a crowd. In fact, it was built for the 1960 World Fair in Seattle, so it's built to deal with that many people, and it is where the Seattle Space Needle's at. My only reservation right now, Jeff, is that they didn't so far the ownership of the Oakview Group, which is interlinked with the Seattle ownership group here in Seattle. They did not choose to apply for a domain name that included the Seattle Grunge, so I'm very disappointed in that. But there are 38 other names that they're considering right now, but not the Grunge, unfortunately, which is the only thing that bothers me at this point. But it is going to create a cultural change here too, I'm sure, and we could talk about that too, because this is not typically an ice skating area of the country.
Right. Well, I want to talk about that because you're only about 120, 140 miles from Vancouver, which is, and of course, you have a border there of the two countries. But hockey has been played, going back to the Metropolitans, Junior A hockey, and you have a rival to the south in Portland. For a long time, there was a thought of a hockey team there because there's a basketball team and an arena, the Rosemont Arena there in Portland. So even though it isn't a hockey area, there used to be a defenseman, I'm aging myself here, from the 1970s named Barry Beck, who played for the New York Rangers, and he's a Seattle native. I don't know if he's involved in any of the of this group, but I did see that the movie director Jerry Bruckheimer is also a part of this too. But it would seem to me that it is, I think, a great location for the NHL, and I'm hoping people do connect with it because it is. At its core, a fundamentally great sport. It's fast, it's exciting. If you're at the arena itself, I think you become, hooked as a hockey fan. And it's gotten better. It's gotten away from what I feel has been the past violence of the sport in the 70s and 80s when I grew up, where there was fights seemingly every whistle. It was a fight. Not so much anymore. So you get to see more of the skill is what I guess I'm trying to say. Do you sense that the quote unquote millennials, those that were them, the tech folks, are they taking to this? Because the other interesting part of this was amazing, is something like 33,000 people who applied for season tickets in the first day or something like that, some number that was just amazing.
It was about 35,000, and I do actually hang out with a lot of millennials in Seattle. It's hard not to. Some of my best friends are young. I just was a witness at a friend's wedding who are both in their
that crowd. Well, but I know you hang around with millennials, and you're close in age to begin with. But go ahead.
Well, I think that a lot of the folks I've been talking to are interested, and I noticed a few things, Jeff. Okay, first of all, my mother grew up in Michigan where people ice skate because it's a tradition. Now here the ponds don't necessarily freeze over in the winter. It stays relatively warm in the winter here. Wet, definitely. It's the wet
rain
cold,
than snow, right.
But I did notice when I was in Olympia, Washington, just 2 days ago, which is our state capital, that there is a new outdoor skating rink that's operating, and I've never seen that before. There's also an indoor rink, at Seattle Center already, where Key Arena is located, where people do gather in the winter, at least, to ice skate. However, as a young man, spending some time up here, I played field hockey, and the reason is because there wasn't enough ice, and there aren't enough ice rinks. They really need to expand the sports complexes around here to include that. And because my only concern is that yes, there are some good hockey players around here, including, the Thunderbirds, which is been a hockey team here for quite a while. And I'm looking forward to some major rivalries, between the Seattle team and other teams around the area on the
particularly Vancouver. Yeah.
Yes. And I think that will happen, just like we've seen between Vancouver and Seattle and Portland with soccer. But, it's going to take a little bit of a cultural change, and I think people are ready for it. They seem to be excited about it. People like to ice skate. They just haven't had as many opportunities. So one of the concerns I had, of course, is, where are we going to get our talent? And, I think it's pretty obvious that a lot of our talent is got to come from the other teams in the NHL and, Canada especially. I know I have a good friend who was the lead singer in a band I was in for a couple of years called the Galaxy Machine, and he's from Toronto. And, I mean, hockey to a Canadian is like baseball is to America.
Oh, yeah, even more so in some cases.
Yes.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I know some folks in the Seattle area are going to realize that soon when they see the really diehard hockey fans out there supporting these teams. But the Thunderbirds have always been a lot of fun, and I think there is interest here. It's just that we have to have a sports arena that is capable of supporting an NHL hockey team, and at the moment we don't. So hopefully by 2021 we will have a nice renovated Key Arena that's a good hockey arena for all of the teams that will come to Seattle. And I think it will be a boon probably to the economy as people visit the city, just like they do to come and see the Seahawks from all over the state. So, so there will be some winners for sure. I have to admit, though, that there are some folks in town who thought that maybe $800 million would be a good number, a good sum to spend on, things like trying to house people who are homeless, because that's a major concern, a major issue in Seattle. So there has been some political pushback, of course, against that amount of money being spent on a public arena. There's always folks who question that.
How much is public money and how much is private money?
I'm not really sure of the breakdown, but I know that it was a controversial decision by Mayor Jenny Durkin soon after she was inaugurated as our mayor. She went right out and said, I am going to support an NHL franchise. So it will, get support from the city. And the Seattle Center is also partly owned by the city. And so there will be some public, funding going into this, I'm sure. The mayor's already made that very clear. But the entire project is now up at $800 million. Now, coming from Boston and what the big dig was like, that when you do a public project or a public-private partnership, because this will be usually almost always maybe 99.999% of the time goes over budget. So $800 million is where we're starting. We'll see where it ends up.
We're talking with our good friend Mark Taylor Canfield here on the Jeff Santos Show. We often get into the environment, but this is an issue that is happening across the country with the focus. I think it's happening in Seattle, where everything from building issues to concerns over fracking and everything else going on. Talk to me about the latest concerns that you're seeing, on the environmental issues that are affecting people in Greater Seattle.
Well, definitely the symbol of environmental delicacy in this area are the orca whales, and people in Seattle are very concerned about the orca whales. So I think that on the forefront of everyone's mind is how will increased oil tanker traffic on the Puget Sound affect the already dwindling orca whale population. And people are, so the orca is seen as a signal species, a species that is a marker on how the environment is doing. Right now, they are malnourished, and there's not enough salmon for them. That has led to more pushes against all of the hydroelectric dams in Washington State, which is, clean energy in that it doesn't create a carbon footprint, but at the same time makes it very difficult for the salmon to spawn. They have to build these huge salmon ladders, to get through even the locks here in Seattle, where we go out into Elliott Bay from Lake Union, which is actually above sea level. There's a fish ladder in order for the salmon run to go through there. There's also fish ladders in several city parks, especially Cary Park here in Seattle, and Cockney Park, excuse me. Cary Park is where NBC and CBS and CNN always go to put their anchor person because it's got a great view of the city. But Carkeek Park actually has salmon runs. And so right now people are very concerned about the Trans Mountain Pipeline because the Canadian government, bought it from the Kinder Morgan Corporation. And Justin Trudeau seems to be very proud of that. But at the same time, a lot of folks, and especially the First Nations people and the tribes from Vancouver Island all the way down here to the southern Puget Sound a lot of them are really up in arms about this issue. They really think that it's irresponsible to increase the amount of oil tanker traffic in Puget Sound and the West Coast to this degree that tar sand oils coming from Alberta through the Trans Mountain Pipeline actually will be traveling through the state of Washington. So it's not just a Canadian issue. It's now in the United States. It will be passing through Washington State into Bellingham near the Canadian border. And then they'll be filling up the oil tankers from there. And they'll be headed to places like Anacortes, Washington, or Tacoma, also down the West Coast to San Diego, Long Beach, California, San Francisco. So
wow.
There's a lot of concern that tar sand oil, which doesn't float but just sinks to the bottom, is almost impossible to clean up.
Yep,
and
exactly.
It's just not good for the environment. So we're hoping that Governor Jay Inslee will take a stand on this. He was against the Trans Mountain Pipeline before the Canadian government bought it. So Greenpeace and other groups and the First Nations folks are asking people to lobby the governor to take a very forceful stand against tar sand oil traffic through Puget Sound in Washington State.
We have talked about this before, that the relationship of the three cities known as Cascadia, Portland, Vancouver, and Seattle, of course. Is there at all any help from the premier, which is the governor here in the States, the premier of British Columbia, if indeed Governor Inslee, takes a stand here, or is it the power of the premier on this issue, really, it doesn't have much power because it's a federal issue, and therefore the president, or the prime minister in this case, Trudeau, who I like in general, is really ignoring this. What is the power scenario just to the north of you there in British Columbia?
This is the perfect question to ask Val Palmer, who's a great journalist from the Vancouver Sun.
Yes, I'm going to get him on one of these days, yes.
Yeah, I would love to hear what he has to say about this, too, because from what I've been able to see from, CBC coverage, et cetera, is that the federal government is pretty much controlling the issue right now. And it's been surprising to me, although I've had some of my Canadian friends warn me that, Canada has a reputation of being more environmentally conscious than it actually is, according to some of my friends up there. They're saying that recently there's been a large increase in mining operations and these oil pipelines, and that for some reason the Canadian government is getting more and more friendly to the idea of fossil fuels. So I don't know where that's coming from, whether it's an economic issue. I still don't quite understand why Justin Trudeau thinks this is such a great idea, since Kinder Morgan sold the pipeline because they have so much litigation against them. Wow. And so many tribes opposing them, whose land it's going to be passing through, that literally they threw up their arms and said, please, someone take it off our hands. So why Justin Trudeau thinks it's such a great idea, I don't know. Maybe it's a part of nationalizing industry, which, has a tradition in Canada. But I've also been told that by some of the Greenpeace activists, and by the way, I was out on the Greenpeace ship, the Arctic Sunrise, for a week this summer following the workers and following the oil tanker traffic. They told me that they think that the Canadian government really would like to sell it off itself. It's kind of an albatross around the Canadian government's neck, the same way it was for Kinder Morgan, because so many of the First Nations people and the reservations are against it, whose land it travels through. It's been opposed by Governor Jay Inslee and by major environmental groups from Greenpeace to the Sierra Club and everyone else you can think of. So just not a good idea for Puget Sound. We've never been an oil-friendly place. Even coal trains are pretty much outlawed in our part of the country, that there's still oil trains that move through here, and there are several major refineries, but it's not a huge industry in Washington state the way it might be in other parts of the country, like in the Gulf states. So we'll see where it goes. I'm waiting myself to see what Governor Inslee has to say about it. I think since the Canadian government is now owning the pipeline, it kind of creates a whole different pressure on him and on the Premier for British Columbia, who apparently doesn't have much power to stop it at this point.
Wow. Well, we obviously need a new president and Congress on top of that. And of course, Ms. Jayapal can hopefully lead the charge on that too. Before we go, we get about a minute or two left here. I wanted to tell you that I heard that the Seattle Totems is the leading candidate in one of the local news outlets here in Boston.
I think that would be a great name. If they're not going to call it the grunge, then
I love the idea of the grunge. One big guitar, I mean, that would be fantastic. But, if not, then I understand. I actually pulled up the Seattle Totems jersey, which is being sold for $40 on Borez Does Customs. Anyways, it's already out there as a potential.
Somebody's trying to tip their hand. Yeah.
Yes, is indeed. There's also some green jerseys which actually look very cool. One of the things that's also, again, because we just got limited time here, I would like to see kind of the green blue which the Seahawks and the Mariners wear as well, because that to me it's such a green blue state, because it's it's very rainy and therefore a lot of green, and of course you're surrounded by water. So I like that color combination. The Sonics were green too. Is there any thought of what the colors should be? I noticed that, there is some green element in here for the Totems as an example. I got about 30 seconds. Go ahead.
You have a great intuition, Jeff, because the Thunderbirds, it's probably inevitable.
Well, I hope it is indeed. Mark, great. Stay safe out there in your travels, my friend. We will obviously look forward to talking to you next Tuesday, and hopefully some of these issues on the environmental side get worked out too. So we're looking forward to that, and we'll have to bring on your colleague from Vancouver with you one of these days too. I thank Jason. You're welcome. I want to thank Jason for producing this broadcast. Thank our guests, Mark Taylor Canfield, Robert Craig, and Melissa Tomlinson for their insight today. Thank you for listening. We'll be back tomorrow. Ro Khanna will be here with us. My name is Jeff Santos, and it's my time to...
You're listening to 1590 WSMN Nashua.
USA Radio News.
Former Senate Majority Leader Bob Dole is among those paying respects to the late Bush's flag-draped casket. George H.W. Bush's Vice President Dan Quayle talks about this moment on Fox News.
Yeah, I served with Bob Dole in the Senate. He's a good friend. I saw Elizabeth yesterday, his wife, and I asked how the leader, I always still call him the leader, I said, how's the leader doing? She says, he's doing fine. He's going to come tomorrow to pay his respect, and he'll be at the National Cathedral on Wednesday.
On Tuesday, the Dow lost nearly 800 points to close the day at 25,027. The S&P was also down, as was the NASDAQ. A Pew Research Center study shows that nearly half of Americans prefer to watch the news, while a third would rather read it. 45% of Americans say they prefer to get their news from television. You're listening to
DailyLounge.com.
After being briefed by CIA Director Gina Haspel, even more senators are convinced that the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia knew about the murder of Washington Post columnist Jamal Khashoggi, including Republican Senator Lindsey Graham.
I went into the briefing believing it was virtually impossible for an operation like this to be carried out without the Crown Prince's knowledge. I left the briefing with high confidence that my initial assessment of the situation is correct. I think Secretary Pompeo and smoking gun, there's a smoking saw.
President Trump is agreeing with Chinese leaders not to impose any new tariffs for 90 days while trade talks continue. White House economic advisor Larry Kudlow says the agreement was not meant to be lengthy.
This is a question of commitments, which is very, very important. It's a question of topics. This is much bigger and much broader than anything we've ever talked about.
And you're listening to US
580725.
David Goggins is one of the toughest men alive. Goggins is the only member of the U.S. Armed Forces to complete SEAL training, U.S. Army Ranger School, and Air Force Tactical Air Controller training. Goggins has a new book out titled Can't Hurt Me, Master Your Mind and Defy the Odds. He tells Fox News how he was able to change his life and what everyone needs to live for.
Well, it's all about finding what you want, your purpose in life. And one big thing that people don't realize is we're all here for a purpose. You have to figure out what your purpose is. And that was my big issue. I thought, oh, my God, my life is so horrible. Why God? Why me? Why this? Why that? Until I flipped it upside down and realized that my life was the perfect training ground to therefore teach people on what I learned about the dumb. It really makes you dumb. You really have to really tap into quiet. Quiet is where you get all the strength in the world. And when my life was real noisy.
Sweet deals on cookies. For USA Radio News, I'm Tim Berg.
It's 8:05.
A former First Lady's book is flying off the shelves. USA Network's Chris Barnes reports.
Michelle Obama's Becoming is selling at a pace rarely seen for a political memoir or any nonfiction book. Combined hardcover, ebook, and audio sales in the U.S. and Canada topping 2 million copies in the first 15 days, according to Crown Publishing. It sold 725,000 copies on its first day alone. And the book is also taking off overseas, topping bestseller lists all across Europe.
Prince Charles will be in Washington tomorrow representing Queen Elizabeth at the funeral of former President George H.W. Bush. For USA Radio News, I'm Tim Berg.
It's 28 degrees. It's 6:05.
I adopted Bento in 2010 from a shelter. This cat makes me make art. He's always motivating me to draw pictures of him. He just is motivating artistically. He's my best friend, but a lot of people know him as Keyboard Cat.
Keyboard Cat, YouTube star and shelter pet. Amazing adoption stories start in shelters. Start yours today. Visit theshelterpetproject.org to find a pet near you. Brought to you by Maddie's Fund, the Humane Society of the United States, and the Ad Council.
Welcome back to What's Your Deal? So, Susan, ready to see what's behind door number 1?
What about door 2 or 3?
In beautiful downtown Boston, this is the Jeff Santos Show on the Revolution Radio Network. Rebuilding America together.
Thank you, Jason, and good afternoon and good evening, Americans, and welcome to the Jeff Santos Show. We are live in Somerville's Assembly Row, just steps away from the Boston border. It's great to be with you today on this Tuesday, the 4th of December, 2018. Making our way into the year of 2019. Can you think of it, folks? We have a great program for you. Our regular contributors are with us today, and a very timely for our first one. Robert Craig, Executive Director of Wisconsin Citizen Action, will be with us at 6:34 p.m. He, of course, Wisconsin all the time. And what they're doing in Wisconsin now is outrageous. It's just simply outrageous. But this is the Republicans of today. And maybe they have been this way all along, but it's been basically, showing through, like a scab that's been wide open in the public. They don't want Democrats. They don't want people of color. They don't want young people to vote. End of story. And that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to take all the weapons away from the Attorney General, Democrat just elected, from the governor. They know that the Democrats are going to investigate all of this. They're going to try to let people vote, and the Republicans want no part of it. Look, we'll get into this in a second about how it's a dying party. But I want to then take us to 7:00 with Melissa Tomlinson, of course, our Barracuda in-house, who is going to be the person to talk about over-testing in this country. And this is an issue we talked about 2 weeks ago. And we're going to do it again. Melissa will join us at a regular time. We spoke about it a little bit last week too in her Friday appearance, I think it was. Now we will also talk to Mark Taylor Canfield, and very relevant today. The National Hockey League decided to make Seattle an expansion franchise. What does that mean off the ice? Because really, it's all now about the impact in the city, the taxes, everything else. The building, this first season is going to be 2021-22, so they'll start the season in October, the regular season anyways, in October of 2021. just a little over 2.5 years away. So we have really interesting moments to talk with all of these folks, and we will do that. Our song of the day comes to us from Seattle. We kind of wanted to pick a Seattle band. We also wanted to have sort of the mood of the country, and there's nobody better than the great Pearl Jam, of course, made a success in Seattle. And, of course, the song is Black. And it has been a very difficult time if you are a Democrat with Donald Trump in power. Whether or not Mr. Mueller will find anything, there's going to be some sort of information coming out potentially as soon as tonight. We'll monitor the news on all of that for you. And, of course, this is, the week of mourning for President George H.W. Bush as well. So Black is the color and the song that we play today. As I said, folks, and this is something that we need to really be aware of. There are people in power, mainly who are white, mainly who are wealthy, and primarily who have the power to influence. Whether we're talking about the Koch brothers, whether we're talking about oil titans or folks in the military-industrial complex, seen a lot of them, by the way, running through the powers of corridor at the funeral and memorial services for Mr. Bush. Don't forget, it was Bush who was the CIA director. It was Bush who was the vice president and supposedly did the October surprise that ended Jimmy Carter's hope of a re-election in October with the whole Iran holding off the release of the hostages, which could have very easily in 1980 re-elected Jimmy Carter. He would have been a hero, obviously. So this is Bush's legacy, Iran-Contra, and of course we know about his son. I can't really criticize the father for the son's sins, but he is an offspring. But really, the thing that I think is important here is that there is a attempt by the Republicans as a whole, and I think this is extremely evident not only in Wisconsin, but it was in North Carolina last year, that they see in those two states that the Republican Party is losing votes because there's a larger African-American population in places like Charlotte. Younger people in the tech community are coming out and voting Democratic in the Raleigh Triangle, a very high-tech area, very similar to what Seattle and Silicon Valley is. So they tried to strip the power of the recently elected governor in the time between the election in 2016 and when the power became when the Democrats won the governorship from 2016 to 2017. They're doing the same thing now in Wisconsin. They're taking the power away from the governor, the power away from the attorney general, which wants to open up, a large scandal in Wisconsin, and we'll get into this with Robert Craig, of course, in terms of voter suppression, in terms of the powers to look into a lot of these issues, including the problems that Walker had. So they're trying to take power away. This is, of course, because they're losing everywhere, folks. The Republican Party has been on the decline. If you think about it, on the presidential side, which is when most people vote, they have not won an election truly since 1988. You can say they won 2004, but he cheated in 2000, George W. Bush did, to get in. Didn't have the popular vote. Neither did Trump. And in 2000, he didn't win Florida either. That was corrupt. Ms. Harris and everything else. So if you think about it, and of course Clinton won pretty handily over Bush and Dole in 92 and 96. So not that the Democrats are the majority party either. Right now, 43% of registered voters classify themselves as independents. And that's probably only going to go up. They're the majority. The real majority of citizens, not people who actually are registered to vote, are non-voters. Because both parties have basically given them, not all Democrats, and maybe 5 or 6 Republicans, but most of them have given them the middle finger and said, we're taking money from Wall Street and military-industrial complex and all of these other powerful entities, big banks, pharmaceuticals, health insurance companies. You can go on and on down the line. I think you know who they are. So in order to combat this, the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, now 90, even though it probably is about 50 that are really strong progressives. The other 40, maybe on social issues, but not as strong on economic issues. So what we have here is this attempt by the Republicans, state by state. They'll do it again in other places. They already have done things in Ohio, where Husted, now is the lieutenant governor. You can only imagine what he's going to do with DeWine. So the Democratic Party has a lot of work ahead. If they so choose, they can make it very clear that the Republican Party is not only a party of the elite, and they got to run a populist candidacy. You cannot run, a candidacy that is, about competency, not ideology. You can't run on we can be better. We can't run on, our friends on the other side have a right to an opinion, but we believe we have better. No. And we can't just criticize Trump as an evildoer. You have to offer much different solutions that have been offered by either party, which is why Medicare for All is popular, which is why 4 years of free public university is popular, which is why a minimum wage is popular, which is why regulation of Wall Street, getting us out of endless wars in the Middle East, all of these things have not been addressed over the last 40 years by any nominee of the Democratic Party and very few members of Congress. So that's why a lot of people still believe that Bernie Sanders is the best chance for the Democrats to bring in new people and to have a working majority and potentially be a majority party, because he comes from the independents. Again, that 43%. Look, folks, Bernie Sanders isn't perfect. But when you look at perfection, is perfection just skin deep? I mean, if we clone a JFK, good looking, sense of machismo, all of that. But with all his talents, he couldn't move legislation. It took his assassination to get the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, Medicaid, and Medicare all passed under LBJ. Now, if Kennedy's not killed and the Democrats don't win back in 64, I don't know if Johnson can do it either. Although he had the machinery at the time, wheeling and dealing and, literally and blackmailing in some cases the legislators in that time period. Look it up if you don't believe me. Or watch C-SPAN occasionally. They have a lot of the audio tapes when he gets to Rayburn and all these guys, the former Speaker of the House. So what we have is an opportunity, and I feel that it is unfortunate that a lot of Democrats think that they have to just focus on the Trump issues. Now, look, I'm no fan of Trump. I don't believe that there is an opportunity to impeach him right now. Maybe that could change. Maybe if things get really bad, the Republicans look at this and then, they say, well, we're going down. We have a lot of people up for Senate for re-election. And if we allow this guy to go on, we're going to be in the minority for the next 20 years. They could look at it that way and say, well, too bad, Donald Trump. You're not one of us anyways. You're not part of our club. So adios. Now, whether or not that can happen, it's going to take, 22 senators or something like that? They need 67. So, that's quite a Herculean task. But, things can change. But I really believe that Donald Trump is going to survive this. And the question is can the Democrats offer solutions to the problems of the average American, whether that average American is living in Harlem, or that average American is living in Wichita, whether that average American is living in Santa Barbara, or right here in Greater Boston. The fact is that there are tons of places in this country which are hurting right now. And if the Trump administration's policies, which have seen the stock market go crazy today, it goes up and down every other day, it seems. If we fall into a recession, we got ourselves a major, major problem here. And this could strengthen, in some cases, Trump's as a dictator. But at the same time, his popularity numbers could sink into the low 20s. And at that point, the Republicans may have no choice but to replace him. Now, all of this is very, very possible. But again, the Democrats have to not be considered. And I would like to bring somebody on the program over the next couple of weeks that bring us back to the mid-1970s. Because there was a lot of Democrats expected to run for president in 1976 after Nixon was impeached or resigned because he was going to be impeached in 1974. And it ended up being a little-known governor from the state of Georgia. He was a one-term governor. And Jimmy Carter came out of nowhere to beat a lot of people, including people who were very instrumental in investigating Nixon and so forth, who were, if you want to call them stars of Watergate. And there were a lot of people, the Udalls, and I think even Humphrey ran back then. There were a ton of people. And, of course, Jerry Brown at the end. Largest state in the country in California. Yes, that same Jerry Brown who's leaving in a couple of weeks. So if you look at all of this and look at all of it combined, what do the Democrats want to bring out? Do you bring in a guy like Bullock from Montana as an example, who's a reformer, kind of clean cut, younger guy, further away than he can possibly be? Montana's on the border of Canada in the northwestern part of the United States. Could he be the guy? The campaign finance reform. Our good friend Kim Reed is a big fan of his, the director of Dirty Money, the great documentary. So it would seem to me that you can go in that direction, or you can go in the direction of a Bernie Sanders, who is well known but not going after Trump on Russia or some of the other issues as much as some of the others are. You know, you see the same old folks out there, the two reps from California that are one who's the intelligence, going to be the intelligence chair, the Swalwell as well. Of course, Nancy Pelosi. On the Senate side, you see everyone from Schumer to Mark Warner. So these are the guys that you're seeing in the House and Senate. You're not seeing, and I think this is another aspect of this, you're not seeing a Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren or even a Cory Booker, with the exception of the Kavanaugh hearings, out there hitting Trump every day, where these others are. Jerry Nadler is another one that you see a lot of, and we'll be seeing a lot of, the head of Judiciary Committee in the House. So the way I look at this is that the Democratic Party as we know it today, needs to be able to show what they are about, which is why I mentioned healthcare and education, minimum wage, infrastructure, although they have to form on the infrastructure the difference between the Republicans, which is all privatized all the time, and the need for public. It's public transportation. It is commuter rail that's public. It is subways that are public. It is buses that are public. Some is urban, some is suburban. Some should be rural as well. In yesterday's taping for Free Speech TV, we spoke with a reporter from France 24, James Andre, who we would love to have on radio. But in fairness to him, it's right now about 12:30 a.m., so it'd be very hard to ask him to come on this late. But we'll try to get a tape and play it next week. But one of the mentions he made is the fact there's this rural divide in the Paris riots. And the big march coming up on Saturday, we'll see what comes out of that. So what we have is a scenario that if you look at what has happened here, you have to think that if the Democratic Party moves in the direction of where Bernie Sanders has been for most of his life, but obviously over the last few years where he's become more well-known, then the Democratic Party will be in good shape. If they decide to be this centrist, well, Trump is so bad, any of us can win kind of thing, and they go with a Joe Biden, great guy, like him a lot personally, I've met him, I've interviewed him, but he shouldn't be president for a number of reasons. And the simple one is he's yesterday's news. He's run a couple of times and lost for president. He was vice president, and he's no Barack Obama. So are really people going to get excited about Joe Biden? He's making a comment today that he's the most qualified. Here we go again. Hillary Clinton was the most qualified woman. Joe Biden, qualified man. Nobody wins on qualifications. If that was the case, we'd be hiring accountants and lawyers. And majority leaders in different parties. That doesn't work. You want somebody who's going to inspire you. You want somebody who's going to do things differently, because the majority of the American people don't want the status quo. They've been lied to for 40 years, if not longer. And they now realize it. And the next generation realizes even more, because they can go on their phones and they can say, look at all the lies. Here's Nixon. Here's Ford. Here's Carter. Well, not as many lies as just incompetency. And Reagan. You can go Watergate and Iran-Contra. What we did in terms of the economy. All of these things. And of course, Clinton selling out on Glass-Steagall and NAFTA and so on and so forth, and you know the rest. So this is what it's at. That's why I want to go with Sanders. That's why I want to go with that kind of philosophy. So we'll talk with Robert Craig about all what's happening in Wisconsin and bring that conversation too. He's coming up. You're tuned into the Jeff Santos Show. We'll be right back after this.